So today, we're jumping into one of the most incredible stories in all of human history, how a brand new faith, born in the deserts of Arabia, created one of the biggest empires the world had ever seen. Okay, let's get right into it. Now, you might think the story of Islam starts completely on its own, but you'd be surprised. It actually shares some really deep roots with two other major world religions. We're talking common traditions, beliefs, and yeah, even some of the same prophets. And that's the big question, right? What was it about this message, about these people, that let them expand so fast, so explosively? Well, the answer starts with a name that a lot of us are probably going to recognize. To really get the beginning of Islam, we've got to rewind the clock and start with a shared patriarch, a common ancestor who's revered by literally billions of people all over the world. This is what I find so fascinating. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They're often called the Abrahamic faiths for a really good reason. They're all built around worshiping one God, they all follow messages delivered by prophets, and they all trace their spiritual family tree right back to the prophet Abraham. In Islam, Abraham, or Ibrahim as he's known, is absolutely foundational. He's not just seen as this great figure of monotheism, he's also considered the ancestor of the Arab people. And according to tradition, he and his son Ishmael built the Kaaba, that famous cube-shaped building in Mecca that is now the most sacred spot in all of Islam. But the tradition goes, over many generations, Abraham's descendants kind of lost their way. They forgot his message about one God and fell into what's known as Jahiliyyah, a period of ignorance, where they started worshiping all sorts of different idols. And it's right into this world that a new message was about to arrive. Okay, so let's zoom out and look at what the rest of the world looked like at this moment. The timing was, well, it was perfect. You had these huge empires that were totally distracted, and then you had Arabia, a land of tough, independent tribes. It was the perfect environment for something new to take root. You see, context is everything here. In the early 7th century, the two big superpowers in the region, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, were just exhausted. They were broke from fighting each other for decades. Meanwhile, Arabia was this patchwork of tribes. They were connected by family, sure, but politically, they were all over the place. It was basically a power vacuum. And right into this vacuum steps Islam. The word itself means submission to the one God. It was a faith that had echoes of the monotheism you see in Judaism and Christianity, but it was also uniquely Arabian, really reflecting the culture and the traditions of that place. So you've got the message. But every message needs a messenger, right? This next part of the story is all about the man who delivered that message and, in the process, brought a whole people together. And that messenger was Muhammad. Now, he wasn't some king or a great general. He was a merchant from Mecca, and he belonged to a really powerful tribe called the Quraysh. That background gave him a certain standing, a network, and that was going to be absolutely vital. This timeline here really breaks down the key moments. In 610, he gets his first divine revelation. At first, his message wasn't very popular. In fact, he and his followers were forced to flee to the city of Medina in 622. But by 630, he comes back to Mecca in triumph, and by the time he died, he'd united most of the Arab tribes under this new faith. And this new community, this new unity, it was built on 5 core practices, the famous pillars. These included declaring your faith, praying every day facing Mecca, giving to charity, fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, and, if you were able, making a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life. These pillars created a really powerful shared identity. So for the first time in history, you've got the tribes of Arabia all on the same page, united by a common faith and a common purpose. The stage was set for something huge, an expansion that nobody could have seen coming. But then, a crisis. Muhammad dies. The prophet is gone, and the question that just explodes onto the scene is, who's in charge now? And how they answered that question would shape the future of Islam for, well, forever. The answer they came up with was the caliph, a successor who would be both the religious and political leader of this new state. And the community chose Abu Bakr, one of Muhammad's closest friends and one of his very first followers, to be the first caliph. Okay, so the first 4 caliphs, they're known as the rightly guided. And under them, the expansion is just massive. This was all fueled by that new tribal unity and the fact that the big empires next door were basically on their last legs. But, tension started to build over who should lead. Should it be a direct relative of the prophet or one of his chosen companions?
That tension eventually boiled over into a full-blown civil war. And when the dust settled, the Umayyad dynasty rose up, Islam's first hereditary ruling family.
And this is just mind-blowing. In just 1 century after the Prophet died, this new Islamic state, the Caliphate, was ruling the largest continuous land empire the world had ever seen up to that point. It's just staggering.
I mean, let's really put that into perspective for a second. As you can see here, the Islamic Caliphate was bigger than the empire of Alexander the Great, bigger than the mighty Roman Empire, bigger than the Han Chinese Empire. This was a totally new scale of power, and it was put together in an incredibly short amount of time.
But look, this story isn't just about armies and maps. It's also about creating a vibrant, brand new civilization that would go on to leave a huge mark on the rest of world history. And how they ruled? Well, that changed over time too. The Umayyads, they were very focused on an Arab-first empire. But their successors, the Abbasids, they created a truly cosmopolitan civilization. They moved the capital to the brand new city of Baghdad and built a culture where even non-Arab converts could rise to the top. And as the empire got bigger and more complicated, power couldn't just be in the hands of one guy, the caliph. A whole new class of religious experts popped up, the ulama, which means the scholars. They became the main interpreters of Islamic law, and they created the complex legal and intellectual systems needed to run such a diverse empire. So here's the really crucial takeaway. This new empire didn't just conquer, it absorbed the traditions of the Byzantines and the Persians, it translated and saved ancient Greek philosophy, and it created this amazing cultural hub in places like Baghdad that became a world center for medicine, math, and astronomy. All of this leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. The rise of Islam is this powerful story about how a spiritual idea can spark political unity and how conquest can actually lead to a flowering of culture. It really makes you wonder, what happens when those 3 things, faith, power, and culture, all come together? And how does that fusion shape not just an empire, but the entire destiny of a civilization?